Someone has yet to submit. He gazed resolutely at Father Alphonse, the sole individual who dared to stand against him. Do you have something to say to me? Alphonse remained mute, but a fire had started to ignite within him. When Mary arrived at Emil's home, she sensed her heart racing more than usual. The doctor regarded her seriously, then motioned for her to step inside. I need to take a blood sample. Mary nodded and offered her arm as the needle punctured her skin. She shut her eyes and prayed because she understood that if this were uncovered, they would not receive a second opportunity at the monastery. Gregory suddenly felt a sense of dread locate Mary at once. His soldiers dispersed searching for her everywhere, but by the time they arrived at the forest, she had already vanished. 3 days later, the blood test results were delivered. Father John grasped the paper in his shaking hands. Dr. Emil inhaled deeply, his voice weighed down with seriousness. None of them are pregnant. Sister Anna's jaw dropped. Then what are those signs? They were triggered by a hormone that had been introduced into their bodies through food or water. John felt his blood run cold. Someone intentionally did this, and they knew exactly who was responsible for it all. As Father John reviewed the results, a horrifying thought crossed his mind. He glanced up at Sister Anna, his voice dropping. Gregory orchestrated everything to seize control of the monastery. Anna gasped. He did all of this simply to unseat Mother Superior. Jan nodded, his eyes blazing with fury. Now that we have evidence, we must expose it before it's too late. Just as John was getting ready to head back to the monastery, a villager rushed towards him. They are searching for you. John jumped to his feet. Outside, Gregory's knights had arrived, encircling the village. Time was of the essence. Bishop Gregory's knights had encircled the village. From the window of the room where Father John was residing, the flickering torches lit up the soldiers' armor glimmering in the dark night. Sister Anna shivered, gripping the edge of her robe. They came too swiftly. Father John glanced down at the blood test results on the table, a rising sense of urgency filling his chest. We must leave at once. If we are caught, the truth will be hidden forever. Dr. Emil nodded quickly, stuffing the essential documents into a leather bag. I can assist you in escaping through the back route. Outside, a commanding cold voice boomed. Open the door by order of the bishop. We are conducting a search. They had no time remaining. Dr. Emil led them to a small door at the rear of the house. This path will take you out of the village through the pine forest. Jan gave a thankful nod, but before departing, he seized Emil's hand. You must go right away. If they suspect you, they will not be merciful. Emil furrowed his brow but understood the true threat. I will go south. Take care, Father John. There was no time for extra words. Jan and Sister Anna hurriedly slipped through the garden, vanishing into the darkness. The night stormed inside, their eyes filled with menace. Dr. Emil, are you hiding anyone? Emil maintained his composure, though his heart raced wildly. I am only a doctor. Why are you looking for me? The commander narrowed his eyes, surveying the room, but there was no sign of John or Anna. They had escaped just in time. At the forest edge, Mother Superior Mary and the nuns remained concealed. No one spoke, only the cold wind rustled through the trees, mixing with their silent prayers. Sister Beatrice huddled beside Sister Helen, whispering, how long can we endure like this, always fleeing? Mary stayed silent. She knew they could not exist in shadows forever, but returning would mean capture or worse. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the distance. Everyone tensed, ready to flee, but then a familiar voice called out, Mother Mary, the first bring news. Sister Anna emerged from the darkness, followed closely by Father John, exhausted but his eyes blazing. Mother Superior Mary rushed forward, gripping John's hands. Did you find anything? John didn't reply immediately. Instead, he pulled the blood test results from the leather bag. They are not pregnant. The nuns gasped, unable to believe their ears. But why did we experience those symptoms? Sister Agnes stammered. John tightened his grip on the paper, his voice grim. Someone injected hormones into your food and water. This was a conspiracy. Stunned silence descended over the group. Mary inhaled deeply, steadying herself. Then who is responsible for it? John met her gaze. Gregory. Meanwhile, at St. Benedict Monastery, Bishop Gregory remained calm, as if his victory was already assured. Father Alphonse, though fearful, decided to confront him once more. You have gone too far, he said. his voice quaking with anger. "You have ruined an entire monastery for your own ambitions." Gregory laughed coldly. "You are too naive, Alphonse. This is not about ambition, it is about power." Alphonse clenched his fist, but Gregory was too powerful to overthrow alone without evidence. There was nothing he could do in the woods. Mother Superior Mary made her choice. She would face Gregory. "We must go back." Sister Helen gasped. "Bob, what if they seize us?" Mary glanced around, her gaze steadfast. "We have proof. If we stand idle, evil will prevail." Father John agreed. "I will accompany you." They had prepared themselves for the final confrontation. As soon as Mary and John emerged from the woods, one of Gregory's soldiers noticed them. His eyes widened in panic and he turned his horse around, racing back toward the monastery at full speed. "Notify the bishop they've returned." The following day, in front of St. Benedict Monastery was thick with tension. Gregory stood on the steps of the monastery, hands held together, gazing down at the nuns he had cast out. Mary stepped forward, her gaze fixed intently on him. "I know what you have done, Gregory." Gregory raised an eyebrow but kept his composure. "Oh, and how do you plan to substantiate
that?" John displayed the blood test results, his voice resonating. "We have proof." The crowd murmured, and the senior priests exchanged looks. A shiver traveled down Gregory's spine as he realized the situation had shifted. Father Alphonse, who had remained silent until this moment, suddenly stepped forward. "If you are innocent, permit the church council to confirm the truth." Gregory was silent as he had no escape. Darkness had enveloped the monastery for far too long, but now light was starting to break through. St. Benedict Monastery, once a beacon of holiness and respect, now found itself at the heart of a conflict concerning justice and truth. Mother Superior Mary stood at the gates, confronting Bishop Gregory, the man responsible for her exile and that of her nuns. Yet this time, she was not alone. Father John's hands held indisputable evidence. "We have test results confirming that the nuns were never pregnant," John proclaimed. "They were poisoned with an artificial hormone." The entire monastery went quiet, and the senior priests exchanged anxious glances as doubt began to infiltrate their expressions. Father alone moved forward and took the results from John's hands. "If this is true, then who poisoned them?" John gazed squarely into Gregory's eyes. "You already know the answer, Bishop Gregory." Gregory was not one to easily concede. He scoffed, his voice laden with disdain. "How ridiculous! You are fabricating a ludicrous story to exonerate these sinful nuns." Mother Superior Mary advanced, her gaze as keen as a knife. "If they are guilty, let an independent doctor evaluate them. If you have nothing to conceal, what do you fear?" Gregory was momentarily caught off guard but quickly regained his composure and faced the senior priests. "This is a sham. We cannot trust a test carried out by an unknown doctor." At that moment, Dr. Emil Grant, who had performed the tests, stepped out from the crowd. "I am Dr. Emil Grant. I examined the blood samples of these nuns, and I swear before God that they are innocent." A wave of shock swept through the priests and the assembled townspeople. Those who previously hurled stones and condemned the nuns began to have second thoughts. A man murmured, "Could we have been mistaken?" An elderly woman hid her face, her voice trembling. "I cursed them, I cursed innocent women." Another priest, Father Stephen, turned to Gregory, suspicion reflecting in his gaze. "Your Excellency, if you have nothing to conceal, allow an independent medical council to verify the results." Gregory tightened his fists, though his facial expression remained steady. "I have nothing to prove." "Then what are you afraid of?" Father John inquired coldly. Gregory remained silent, fully aware. The tide was shifting against him at that moment when a voice rang out from the gate. "I can supply more evidence." All eyes turned toward the figure stepping out from the shadows as a young priest advanced. It was Father Vincent. Gregory's eyes widened in disbelief as if he couldn't comprehend what he was witnessing. "You," he growled. Vincent approached, pulling out a small notebook and raising it high. "This is the record of a doctor who collaborated with Gregory, It clearly documents how he commanded hormones to be introduced into the monastery's food supply. A ripple of astonishment spread through the crowd. Mother Superior Mary felt her heart racing in her chest. Gregory took a step back, his face paling. "You're lying," he roared, but Vincent remained resolute. "Check the signature inside, and you will know the truth." Father Alphonse took the notebook, his eyes widening as he saw the official church seal. This is real evidence. Now even the priests who had aligned with Gregory could no longer conceal their astonishment. Witnessing everything disintegrate around him, Gregory recognized he could not remain any longer. He turned and fled, attempting to escape through the monastery's back gate, but it was too late. The very individuals who had once backed him were now furious. A man stepped forward, obstructing his way. "You will not escape." So simply a mob encircled him. The same individuals who had once placed their trust in him now regarded him as a traitor. A stone was thrown at him, then another. Gregory fell to the ground, pushed and cursed. The church's knights rushed in to intervene, but it was too late. Gregory had already lost all authority. 2 days later, the High Church Council gathered an emergency session before numerous senior priests in the presence of witnesses, and under the intense gaze of Mother Superior Mary and the nuns. Bishop Gregory was condemned. "You have shamed the church and betrayed your sacred commitments." Gregory had nothing left to utter. "You are stripped of all positions and excommunicated from the church forever." He stood motionless, unable to comprehend. He had lost everything. The priests turned their backs on him as if he no longer existed. As Gregory was led out of the monastery, an unsettling sense of peace settled over St. Benedict Monastery. Mary gazed up at the sky, silently thanking God. The nuns held each other, tears of relief streaming down their cheeks. For the first time in weeks of living in fear, they felt genuinely protected. But the most vital task was still incomplete. The monastery had to be restored and their honor fully reclaimed. Their narrative was not over yet. Bishop Gregory was pulled out of St. Benedict Monastery, his eyes filled with panic and fury. He had never envisioned himself in such a scenario, abandoned by the very church he had served, stripped of his positions and cast out as a traitor outside. The crowd gathered had grown even larger, murmurs and whispers resonating through the monastery. A man pointed at Gregory, his voice boiling with rage. "He deceived us all." A woman shook her head, tears swelling in her eyes. "We believed in him, but he was nothing but a beast." Stones began to fly toward Gregory just as they once had toward the innocent nuns. He screamed in desperation, "Stop, I am a bishop. I served God." But no one believed him any longer. The church's knights intervened, shielding Gregory from the mob, not to save him, but merely to expel him as swiftly as possible, to eliminate his influence forever. A senior priest pronounced the final judgment. "Bishop Gregory, you are stripped of all ranks and barred from entering any monastery across the entire territory from this moment on. You are no longer a member of the church." Gregory collapsed to his knees, his lips trembling. "No, this cannot be." But this was the reality. He had lost everything. As Gregory was escorted away, the monastery gates swung open. Freed at last from his corrupt dominion, Mother Superior Mary stood at the entrance, gazing at her nuns. "The women who had suffered so much pain, humiliation, and injustice today, they have been justified." Father John stepped forward, his voice deep and determined. "All the nuns of St. Benedict Monastery are blameless. They never betrayed their commitments." Silence lingered over the crowd, then a single clap interrupted. An elderly woman who had once condemned the nuns now fell to her knees before Mother Superior. "Forgive us, we were ignorant." Mary looked at her, then at the assembled people before speaking. Softly, "Truth has triumphed, but more significantly, we must all learn to pardon." The nuns embraced each other, their tears falling, but they were no longer tears of grief but of happiness and relief. 1 week later, the High Church Council gathered a special assembly to pronounce Gregory's final punishment in the largest city nearby, where the church tribunal was based. A covert trial was conducted. The senior priests, men who had once stood with Gregory, now turned their backs on him. A cardinal spoke solemnly. "You misused your authority to persecute the innocent, dishonored the church, and caused unrest within the community." Gregory had no strength remaining to resist. He could neither flee nor deny the truth any longer. The final ruling was declared. Gregory was permanently dismissed from the clergy. All his belongings and privileges were removed. He was condemned to exile in a remote monastery where he would live out the remainder of his life. in isolation devoid of influence or dignity as the verdict was announced. Gregory bowed his head. He understood his existence was finished. He was no longer an influential bishop, merely a desolate, shattered man. Back at St. Benedict Monastery, Mary entered the great hall where the nuns were lined up, their gazes filled with admiration and affection. Sister Beatrice dashed forward, enveloping Mary in her embrace. "We are back home now." Mary beamed for the first time in weeks. She genuinely felt at ease. God never forsook us. Ambience had entirely changed. Mother Superior, Ms. Father John stood alongside her, nodding. Truth ultimately finds a way to triumph. The very individuals who had once condemned the monastery now came back with esteem. They visited to confess, to pray, and most importantly to seek absolution from the nuns. They had harmed a group of women, presented flowers, placing them at the monastery gates as a token of regret. A man turned to Mary and said, "If it hadn't been for you, the truth would have never come to light. You are the illumination that directed us." So Mary beamed, but she recognized this achievement was not hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had advocated for righteousness. Not long after, the monastery experienced an entire transformation. Stringent regulations were modified to guarantee that no one could exploit it again. Honorable and virtuous priests were appointed to supervise its administration. The exiled nuns were reinstated with full respect. Above all, St. Benedict Monastery was no longer a site cloaked in dread, but rather a representation of justice and unyielding faith. Mary gazed up at the heavens and murmured one final prayer. "We are home." 3 months subsequent to justice being rendered, St. Benedict Monastery had been entirely revitalized. Once a location overshadowed by darkness, fear, and subjugation, it had now evolved into a lighthouse of truth and determination. The nuns resumed their regular lives, but none could ever overlook the ordeal they had faced today. A special ceremony took place at the monastery, attracting hundreds of individuals from various locations. A Thanksgiving Mass, to welcome the nuns back, to proclaim that justice had prevailed, and to guarantee that the errors of the past would never recur. Mother Superior Mary stood before the altar adorned in her most grave habit. Her hands quivered slightly as she gazed down at the hundreds assembled before her. The senior priests, the villagers, and the nuns who had been unjustly exiled all stood collectively in solidarity. Father John advanced, his voice resonating throughout the church. "We are gathered here today to express gratitude to God for steering us back to the truth." A chorus of amen resonated from the congregation. John turned to Mother Superior, his eyes brimming with profound respect. "If not for your bravery, none of us would be present here today." Applause burst forth, but Mary merely provided a modest smile. "It was our faith that brought the truth into the light." She turned to look at her nuns, the women who had once been treated as outcasts but now stood tall, their heads held high. Following Gregory's exile, the church had implemented major reforms. A new oversight council was established to prevent anyone from abusing power as Gregory had. Honest priests like Father John, Father Alones, and Father Vincent were entrusted with protecting the monastery. The nuns were granted more autonomy, no longer subjected to oppressive control. Most importantly, their honor had been fully restored. Not everyone had the courage to face their past mistakes, but today some did. The woman who had once thrown stones at the nuns stepped forward, her eyes red with tears. She knelt, her voice trembling. "Please forgive us." Sister Beatrice looked at her, remembering that terrible day when she and her sisters were cast out like criminals. She bit her lip, but then turned to Mother Superior, waiting for her response. Mary stepped forward, placing a hand on the woman's shoulder. "God teaches us to forgive, learn from your mistakes, and never again let evil guide your heart." The woman broke down in tears, while others in the crowd bowed their heads in deep remorse. The story of the nuns' resilience spread far beyond St. Benedict Monastery. It echoed throughout America. People from distant places came to the monastery seeking truth, learning about courage, and understanding justice. The monastery was no longer just a place for nuns. It had become a beacon of light, a sanctuary where people could come to pray, seek hope, and find righteousness. With the church's support, the once exiled nuns were not only welcomed back but also given compensation for their suffering. They were publicly recognized as innocent and allowed to continue serving God without fear or oppression. The more fragile ones, like Sister Helen, received mental and physical care after enduring months of trauma. Mother Superior Mary dedicated a part of the monastery to helping oppressed women, providing them with a safe haven from a place that had nearly fallen into ruin. St. Benedict Monastery had risen stronger than ever. Though no one spoke of Gregory openly anymore, whispers about him still spread in a remote monastery deep in the mountains. Gregory now lived in isolation, no power, no honor, he was no longer a bishop. There were no sycophants surrounding him, no respect left for him. Day after day, he sat alone, haunted by memories of his once glorious past, now a nightmare he could never escape. He had lost everything, and no one cared about him anymore. As the sun set over St. Benedict Monastery, it cast a golden glow upon the ancient stone walls. The nuns gathered to pray, not in sorrow, not in fear, but in gratitude. Mother Superior Mary looked up at the sky, her heart lighter than ever. We have overcome. Father John stepped beside her, nodding, and St. Benedict Monastery will always represent a symbol of justice.